Welcome, everyone. I noticed some familiar names in the waiting room, which is great. I'm glad to see people are returning. I've got Amy. I don't know if you can see that on my screen, but I'm also getting the waiting room. I don't know why. Anyways, technology, gotta love it. So tonight we're going to talk about investment planning. And if you haven't joined us before, I strongly recommend that you go back and once they're up on the OPA site, go back and take a look at some of the previous questions that we've had, some of the previous information. And again, always feel free to reach out to me as well. And I'm sure that if I don't have my chat screen open, but I'm sure that Amy or Ali will put my information in there as well. Okay, so let's talk. What we're going to do today is we're going to focus on the upper left quadrant in green there, the investment planning. When you have a financial plan, you really need to look at, again, all 5 of these areas. Cash flow management, which we discussed the first night. Why? Because it is the most important area for you when it comes to your plan. Looked at insurance planning, tax planning. We looked at business structures, but you also, and we're not going to do that, but looking at estate planning. And tonight we're focusing on investment planning. So let's take a look at what we're going to talk about. Really, the whole crux to investment planning is, you got an extra dollar. What's the best thing to do with it? Is it putting it against debt? Is it putting it towards investments? And we're going to take a look at the types of investments that there are. And I'm sure I'll reiterate this shortly. The key is always to run the numbers. So you got a dollar, you're expecting to have a mortgage at some point, or you already have one. And the question is, should you put the dollar down against the mortgage or should you invest it? And what you have to do is take a look at how much that dollar is going to save you when it comes to a mortgage. How much is it going to save you in interest over the life of the mortgage versus the dollar invested, how much interest or how much growth is expected on that dollar in the investment. And numbers don't lie, numbers don't have emotion, because emotional reason always outweighs financial reason. But what you want to do is put your money where it's going to have the greatest bang for its buck. And we'll always finish off with questions. I will open my chat screen at some point, and I will stick around until all the questions are answered, be they about investments or anything under the sun. I'm happy to answer, and if I don't know the answer, I have a fair amount of resources that I can reach out to and find the answer or confirm what I believe to be the case. All right, so you've got T-bills. T-bills are treasury bills, they're government, they're overnight lending. Those are the lowest rate of return over a period of time. Then you have term deposits, commonly referred to in Canada as guaranteed investment certificates, where you give your money to the lending institution or to the institution that you're working with, and you give it to them for a period of time, 6 months, 3 months, 9 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years, 5 years. If it's an insurance company, they can go beyond 5 years. Banks and credit unions, to the best of my knowledge, are not able to. And so that's what a term deposit is. Very low rate of return. If you're looking at whether they're viable or not, only if you're going to use the money in the short term. Otherwise, you're not going to keep pace with inflation because the rate of return after inflation is going to be pretty low. The next thing that we're going to look at is fixed income. Fixed income investments are commonly or collectively different types of bonds. And what a bond is a company wants to raise money. And they can do it in one of 2 ways. And the first way is that they're going to borrow money from you. So they give you a promissory note, a bond, and they will pay you interest on that bond, depending on the parameters of the bond over the holding period of that bond. Generally, they're lower risk than it being a stock, although there are what are commonly referred to as junk bonds, and that's companies that are very high risk in nature and can default on the repayment of the loan that you've provided them. The next one is what are called large capital stock. And then the last one is small capital stock. Now, what is a stock or an equity compared to a bond? Well, a company needs to raise money. And so what they do is they have two choices. They can do the bond where they're going to borrow money from you, or they can say, in return for your money, we're going to give you a bit of ownership in our company. Now, that ownership can come with voting privileges. It can come without voting privileges. Large cap are companies, and mid cap, by the way, is in the middle of those two, but large cap are companies generally in around 5 million plus, 10 million plus of profit. Small cap are companies that are working generally up to about 5 mil. And then in between, you sort of get the companies that are referred to as mid cap. And obviously, the higher that you go up that totem pole, the greater the risk is, and the greater the risk, the greater the potential return. And you'll see that over time, when you're investing in the stock market, you're going to see sort of a rate of return that looks like that. And you're going to have an average. And the reason that the average is there, because if you have a properly allocated portfolio, you're not going to get all excited and go and buy more stock when there's a party. What you're going to do is when everyone else is hungover, that's when you want to buy stock. And so it's really very important when it comes to investing that you're taking a look at how long you expect to hold the investment. Because if you start out at a party and you're not going to hold on to the investment long enough, then you're going to be the one that's experiencing the hangover because you're going to buy it when the value of the stock is up and sell it because you need the money when it's down. The biggest risk when it comes to investing is the length of time that you have that you're going to hold the investment. Many times I've seen individuals who are saving, for example, for a home, and they've gone to an institution and they've been put into mutual funds. And that is a real no-no in the event that you're looking at purchasing that home within the next few years. My division to which you go from bond or term deposits to stocks and equities, if you're holding the investment for less than 5 to 7 years, you don't always have enough time to ride out the highs and the lows and get that black line on this graph. If you have more than that length of time, 5 to 7 years, then you have enough time to ride out the highs and lows because over a long enough period of time, you'll sort of hit that average. And there are ways to buy in where you sort of improve that average cost. And so it doesn't cost you as much. You get more money for your bang for your buck. All right, so let's talk about the different types of RSPs. And there's that wonderful, handsome hand. It's not mine. They manicured their nails. I haven't today. But it's really, really important. And probably the biggest misconception is that I have an RSP and it's returning 5%. Well, no, you have a 5% investment that's registered as an RSP. So what's important is that cover. So the investment can be a mutual fund, it can be a segregated fund, stocks, bonds, GICs, etc. What's more relevant is the type of wrapper because that's going to dictate the parameters that surround the investment. And the investment can be the same straight across the board. So when it's an RSP, you get the following items. First of all, the money that you deposit into a registered investment, RSP, you get to deduct that off your income. What that means is if you're earning 70,000, you put 5,000 into an RSP, you don't pay tax on 70,000, you pay tax 70,000 less the 5,000 that you put in an RSP, you deduct it off the top and you pay tax on 65,000, and that's going to save you about 35% or roughly $1,800 in taxes. Second thing that you have to understand is that your money grows without tax. So when you put it into the investment and the investment grows, when it's in an RSP, it's sheltered. You don't have to pay tax on an annual basis. You don't have to pay tax if it's a stock and there's a capital gain, you only pay tax when the money comes out of the RSP. So when it comes out of the investment that is registered as an RSP, you're going to pay tax on the full amount of money that you've put into it. There is a limit because otherwise everyone would throw even more than they already do into RSPs. And so you have an annual contribution limit. That's 18% of your prior year's income up to the maximum of that year. Presently, it's in around $27,000, and you need to be earning approximately $190,000 in order to hit that maximum. The other thing is that if you haven't made a contribution previously, but you have earned income, you have contribution room, and that room accumulates, okay? The key, and as it says in the last point, you need enough time for the money, because it goes in after tax and it's fully taxed when it comes out. You need to be able to leave the money in there long enough that you're overcoming, in essence, that double taxation. So if you put $1 into an RSP and you take it out next year, that's a no-no because it's after tax and it's going to be fully taxed when it comes out, and you're going to end up shooting yourself in the foot. The ideal is that you put the money in now and you leave it for many years to come. And we will compare what makes more sense in RSP or TFSA shortly. Okay, so moving right along, again, we have that same investment. It's the exact same investment as it was on the RSP. It's just this time it's a different wrapper. And this wrapper is a tax-free savings account. And what does a tax-free savings account result in? Well, money that you put into the investment in the TFSA wrapper, you don't get a deduction. So the RSP, you get that $5,000 deduction. You put $5,000 into a TFSA, you're still going to pay tax based on a $70,000 a year income. Money grows inside the TFSA, no tax. Unlike the RSP, though, when you take money out of a TFSA, you also don't pay tax. So again, RSP on this, you get to deduct the contribution from your income. It grows without paying tax, but it's fully taxed when it comes out. TFSA, you don't get the deduction, grows tax-free, and when you take it out, it's fully tax-free. So whether you should do an RSP or a TFSA depends on what the tax bracket that you're going to be in at the beginning and at the end, when you deposit and when you withdraw. If you're in a higher tax bracket today than you will be when you go to withdraw, you want the deduction today. So an RSP would be better as long as you're going to be in a lower tax bracket later on. If, however, you're in a lower tax bracket now, but later in life, you're going to be in a higher tax bracket, then you're probably better off with the TFSA, where you don't get the deduction initially, but later on, when you take it out and you're earning more money later on, that's when taking it out doesn't have that same impact. So in this instance, you also have a contribution limit, but the primary issue with it is that you don't get the deduction up front. And that's your TFSA. So now we're going to jump to a new player in the block as of April of last year, 2023. And that is what's called a first home savings account. And it's only applicable to those who have not owned a home previously or in the last 5 years. It is also applicable in the event that you've been divorced recently. You can use this program. And what this program is, we have the same investment. It's just a much different wrapper that goes around it. And the first home savings account, here's the thing. It really is a combination of an RSP and a TFSA together. Same investment, money that you put into a first home savings account, you get to deduct that off your income. So if you put $5,000 in, you're going to pay tax on 65, not 70,000. The money inside of FHSA grows without paying any tax. As long as you're removing the money from the FHSA to buy a home, you also don't pay tax. You also have a contribution limit every year, The max that you can put in presently is $8,000 per year that the contract is that a contract or the contract that you're putting into has been open, and a lifetime contribution presently of $40,000. I would hope, in order to spur home buying, that they will increase that limit as time goes on. But the only real negative to the FHSA is you must buy a home within 15 years. So if you don't have any intention of buying a home, some advisors out there will tell you, oh, you should still do the FHSA because you get to deduct the money just like an RSP. And at the end of 15 years, if you haven't bought a house, you can transfer it over to the RSP without any penalties at that time. The thing is that in the legislature that was enacted, it says that you must intend to purchase a home. So I'm not sure how Revenue Canada is going to determine that, because life happens. But at this present moment, if you're really not intending to buy a home, I'd be careful using an FHSA to increase your deductible contribution limit. But again, you have the same investment. You can put an RSP wrapper around it. That means you deduct up front, no tax while it's growing, fully taxable when it comes out. You can put a tax-free savings account wrapper. Notice it's the same investment, different wrapper. And that wrapper for a TFSA or tax-free savings account, you don't deduct it up front, grows without tax, and no tax when it comes out. An FHSA, same investment, different parameters. You get to deduct the contribution, grows without tax. As long as it's buying a house, it comes out without tax. If you don't buy in the first 15 years, you have to close the FHSA, and presently they are allowing you to transfer that over to an RSP. And if you had maximized your RSP contributions, that extra amount of money into the FHSA that is now being rolled over does not impact your contribution room. Contribution room is also really important. So let's talk about the three types of investments that we've spoken about so far. With an RSP, again, you have that 18,000 up to a maximum 18,000 in prior year's income. Now, if you have maxed that money and you take 10,000 out of your RSP, that contribution room is gone. You don't regain that contribution room in an RSP. In a tax-free savings account, if you take $10,000 out of a tax-free savings account, the very next January 1st, that's added back to your new contribution total. So it is certainly an interesting way to save, because you can save for something, pull the money out, and regain that contribution room. So you don't lose that contribution room. With an FHSA, if you're going to pull money out, it means you're buying a house. You must pull all the money out of the FHSA. But if you don't contribute in the year that you open the account, that maximum of 8,000 will go to the next year, so you can then put in 16,000. If you open the account, didn't put any money in, and didn't contribute for 2 years, in that third year, you can't put 8, 8, and 8 for 24,000. You can only put a maximum of 8,000. So in that third year, you could, 16,000. In that third year, you could put the first and the second year's 8,000 for 16,000. Then in the fourth year, you could put the 8,000 from the fourth year and 8,000 from the third year, again 16,000, and then you would be caught up. Again, in an FHSA, the maximum, though, over your lifetime is $40,000. And I know I'm going to get questions because I'm sort of going through this quickly, understanding that everyone has sort of what they've heard about and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. And that's why I'm going to stick around and answer all the questions. Now, the other type of investment can be the same investment, but in this case, the wrapper is what's called non-registered. So with a non-registered investment, with the wrapper, no deduction up front. You earn 70, you pay tax on 70. Depending on the type of investment, will determine whether or not you pay tax every year, whether you pay it along the way, maybe not every year, and whether or not you pay tax when it comes out. So it really depends on what the underlying investment is. There's no contribution limits for a non-registered investment. The key criteria to consider about with a non-registered wrapper, no deduction up front, and how is it taxed? Because depending on how it's taxed will depend on whether it is the right vehicle wrapper to be investing in. Okay. Again, if you remember anything from this discussion, investment wrapper determines the tax, and the investment can be the same thing. So I started by saying it's a misnomer to say I have an RSP that's getting 5%. No, you have an investment that's returning 5%, and you've registered it as an RSP, or you've registered it as a tax-free savings account, or you've registered it as a first home savings account, or you haven't registered it and it's a non-registered investment. The investment vehicle doesn't change, only the wrapper does. Okay. And if you can remember that, you are leaps and bounds ahead of those who can't remember that. So, one of the things that I want to touch on that is certainly diminished in flavor and appetite is the home buyer's plan. What the home buyer's plan is very simply using money from an RSP in the purchase of your home. Okay. The key thing, though, is that you need to run the numbers. So you can nowadays an individual can take $35,000 out of their RSPs and use that for a home. You can do both the first home savings account and the RSP home buyers program. The problem with the home buyers program is you take that money out, nowadays you don't have to make a repayment for 5 years, and then you have to start repaying 1/15 of that money over the subsequent 15 years. The problem is that you've got your money out of the market for 20 years. That's not the issue, because at the end of 20 years, you're going to be pretty much the same net worth, whether you had taken it and used it against a mortgage or you'd left it in the RSP. Where the home buyer's plan fails, or you run the risk of it failing, is that the repayment still has to be made. And what I've seen, because the home buyer's plan was first introduced in the early 90s, if I'm not mistaken, is that people just make the repayment. They don't continue to put new money into their RSP. So what that means is that you've got 20 years of just repaying, but you're 20 years without new contributions. And that's why it generally does not make sense. The only 2 times that it makes sense to use the RSP home buyers plan is, number one, you're going to make the repayment and you're going to continue to make your regular contribution. So if normally you're putting in $5,000 and your repayment is $2,000 a year, now you have to be making a deposit of $7,000 for it to make sense. Number one. Number two is if you're, for example, you have an inheritance that you're expecting, and so within a year, you're going to come into a lump sum amount of money that you can then repay the home buyer's loan, that's fine. The other thing, and again, this is the same sort of run the situation, is the lifelong learning plan. So if you've decided that you want to go back and do a PhD, or you want to go back and study in university for something else, and you need your RSPs that you've accumulated to fund that education, you can do, instead of for a home, you can do it for a lifelong learning plan, and you have the same repayment parameters. Actually, no, the repayment parameters, you must restart after 1 year once you take the money out, whereas the home buyer's plan is 5 years based on the changes that the government just introduced. Okay. All right. So the $1,000,000 question is, Brian, I've got $1. Do I invest it or do I pay down debt? And the key things to consider, okay? How long of time are you investing or paying off a debt? Because if, for example, your debt is a mortgage, most mortgages are amortized, or they have a length of time to the end of 25 years. If you're 25 years old, you've bought a home, 25 years from now, you're going to be 50, versus taking the same dollar and putting it into a retirement investment. Unless you're retiring at 50, the likelihood is it's going to be another 15, 20 years beyond age 50. And so now you have to run the numbers and determine where that dollar is going to get its biggest bang. And that means paying down debt or investing. Student debt is something that I get asked about an awful lot. Often because family says you shouldn't have any debt. And the answer is, hang on a second, you've got 8 years left on your OSAP debt, and you want to know whether you should be putting the extra money that you have to wipe out the OSAP debt or putting it into a savings for a home. Well, the OSAP, you're going to save the interest over 8 years versus putting it down for a home that's over 25 years. So chances are that it makes more sense to go against the future mortgage than it is to wipe out the OSAP debt right away. If you have a car debt, that's nowadays people seem to be extending it for 8 years versus paying down OSAP. The question is, where are you going to pay more interest? And with car debt, typically you pay interest first. So if you're 3 years into the ownership of a car and you have 5 years left and you have 5 years left on your student debt, you're probably better off in that instance paying down the student debt over paying down the car debt. But before I would put money into either of those, I would take a look at your overall financial well-being. Do you have other debt? Do you have other investments? Do you have a mortgage? Because a mortgage is likely going to be a lot longer than 5 years. Again, it's comparing A to B by projecting out and seeing how much money you're going to grow in an investment or save in a debt by paying it down. Okay? Pre-tax rate of return is important because some of the investments that you're going to be comparing it to are not going to be subject to taxation until they come out, or it may be a case of the investment is a TFSA, which means you're not going to pay tax. And what I mean by the pre-tax rate of return is, in order to pay a car loan or a mortgage, if you have a 3% rate of interest rate on those, understand that that's 3% after tax. So what's the interest rate before tax? So the higher the income tax bracket that you're in, the higher that requirement is to pay. So if you're earning, $200,000 a year and you're finding yourself in roughly a 50% income tax bracket, if your debt is at 3%, in order for you to have 3% after tax, you have to earn 6% on your money. Then if you're going to compare it to an investment, understand that that investment may be subject to taxation at a 50% rate. So which number is higher, and what at the end of the debt or the end of the investment, what do the numbers look like? And always factor in tax in that calculation. Okay. The other thing that's important is, let's say that you've got a line of credit debt and you've got OSAP debt. Okay, so you've got a student line of credit and you've got OSAP debt. Well, in both of those instances, the question is, what happens if you need the money again later on? Well, depending on the line of credit, student or otherwise, you may be able to get that money back out. So you pay off the $5,000, and in a year you need it and you can get it back. Versus OSAP, you pay off that $5,000, you're not getting it back in the next year. So you need to make sure before you go and lump sum money down on your OSAP debt that you have an emergency fund set up so that in a year, if you need that $5,000 back, you've got a place to draw from. You're not left high and dry by paying down a debt that you can't rekindle that debt, so you can't get that debt back. Okay? This is the biggest thing when it comes to money. Emotional reason will always outweigh financial reason. I have no problems with that as long as you know what the cost is. So previous to the pandemic, I was doing about 50,000 kilometers a year in my car. I leased my car even though it was going to cost me more than financing it. I leased it because I was in my car so much I wanted a new surrounding every few years. I knew it was costing me about 4 grand more, 3 to 4 grand more a year, and I was okay with it. That was my emotional reason being overweighing or outweighing my financial reason. If I was looking financially, I would have financed the car instead of leasing it. But I knew what it was costing me, and that was okay because for that enjoyment of the changing the cars, this is what it cost me, and I was okay with that. The bad thing about it is if I had gone and leased the car to change the car and I didn't know what the impact was. So if emotional reason is going to outweigh financial reason, make sure you know what it's costing you. And a great example of this is, and I'm going to come back to a debt. You have a debt and it's keeping you up at night. And even though if you took the same amount of money and invested it for retirement, it's going to make you more money, that emotional strain of being kept up by that debt, that's emotional reason outweighing financial reason to pay it off if the interest saved on the debt is going to be less than what the ultimate growth is. As long as you know what that difference is, go ahead. As a financial advisor, I applaud you because you know what's going on. Doesn't mean it's the right decision, but at least the emotional decision is being made based on fact and not based on guesses. Not just when in doubt, run the numbers. I would recommend that you always compare how much interest saved, how much growth lost, and compare the two, or how much growth gained compared to an investment, or if you're to a debt, or if you have two possible investments that you're looking at, or two possible debts, which one makes more sense based on how long you're going to hold it and what the rate of saving is, either in an investment or the rate of saving on the interest that you're going to pay. That's what I mean by run the numbers. Pension plan no-nos. Some of you who are listening to this are likely going to be working in an environment where you have access to a pension plan. The most common for physiotherapists when it comes to pension plans is HOOP. I'm not a big fan of doing RSPs when you have a pension plan. Why? Because you remember I said that with an RSP, it's okay if you're in a high income tax bracket now and you expect to be in a lower one later on. But the thing is, with a pension plan, you've already got income that's taxable in your retirement. If you then put an RSP on top of it, you're going to be increasing your taxable income come retirement. That can lead to government benefit clawbacks. It can lead to putting you into a higher tax bracket, which can impact medical care. Maybe not today in Ontario, but at some point down the road, the higher the income that you have, the greater the share of medical costs you might incur. So you have to take a look at, if you have a pension plan, is a TFSA better than an RSP? Or if you don't have a home, is an FHSA the right way to save for one versus a TFSA? So those are things that you need to consider when you have a pension plan. Why depending on a pension plan may be a slow death? Well, understand the pension plan alone isn't going to replace 100% of the income that you were earning during your working years. And contrary to belief, expenses don't necessarily go down in retirement. Maybe you've worked and now you're going to travel the world. Well, traveling the world is likely going to cost you more than staying at home, going to and from work, and having a routine where you're in the proverbial working rut. So if you're saying, well, if I have a pension, I don't need to invest beyond it, then what you're saying to me and what you should be saying to yourself is, I'm okay living with about 65% of my working year income. I'll be fine. That's a dangerous thing, and it may cause you a slow death because you may run out of money sooner than you would want to otherwise. Government pension plans, those are things that are defined benefits. So if you're working for a hospital, you're getting a defined benefit plan. If you're working for the federal government in some capacity. That's a defined benefit. And when it comes to pension plans, there's two types. There's a defined benefit and a defined contribution. Defined benefit says that what's defined is how much you're going to get at the end of the day. Defined contribution, the contribution is what's defined, not the end number. So defined contribution plan is like an RSP, but your employer is also contributing to it. Okay. Whereas a defined benefit is you're creating an income stream later on, generally based on your best 5 years of earnings. Okay. What else do we have? Creating your own pension plan when you're self-employed. When you are self-employed, there is no big parent to provide you with an income in retirement. It's all left up to you. And if you take your money and you own a clinic and all you're doing is throwing the money back in to develop the clinic, that clinic may not provide you with enough money at the end of the day. So it's important to also have some savings. And savings as an individual, independent contractor, self-employed individual is very, very important. Don't just keep putting money back into a clinic. Don't say, oh, I'll do it later, because the earlier that you start investing, the greater the compounding effect of money is. And understand that if money was going to double every time you put money in, that dollar, when it doubles, is $2, when it doubles, is $4, and it goes on. And when it doubles the year before you retire, that can be a significant doubling effect. And the compound of interest is, Einstein, I believe it was, said that that is the eighth wonder of the world. Okay. So I've talked an awful lot. And so what I'm going to do is I'm now going to open the floor up to questions. If I can get my chat screen here. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. And there we go. I'm going to stop the sharing. And now chat. Okay, I see one question in there already. Okay. E-certificates after the webinar. And I presume you're talking about continuing education of some sort. That you need to speak with Ali and Amy, and I don't believe that they're going to be e-certificates. But by all means, reach out if you want me to provide you with the certificate that you heard me speak, and I'd be happy to do that. Okay, so Amy just put in. All right, so let me just go. Victor had a question. Sorry, Vincent. Hi, Vincent. You've been here before. What's the first home buyer's time change with the withdrawal limit being 60,000? You're talking for point of view with respect to the home buyers plan and being 60. It's still 35, if I'm not mistaken, not 60, and it wouldn't change regardless of how much can come out of an RSP, because the whole point is that it doesn't make sense unless you're intending to sell the house come retirement, because if you cash in all the RSPs, putting it into your home, and then all you do is make the repayments, at the end of the day, you're going to have, a home, and you're not going to have a very large RSP, and you're going to need to sell the house in order to get your money back. If that's not what the question was, Vincent, please speak up. Okay. Derek, can you open it if you already own a home but have never opened? No. Derek asked a great question. Can you have an FHSA if you already own a home? And the answer is no. In fact, if you are marrying someone who owns a home, even though you've never owned a home, once you're married, you don't have the ability to have an FHSA anymore. Okay. Okay. We will not be providing automatic. Okay, so Ali said we're not providing certificates. If they need an attendance, for example, for work, they'll send a confirmation, or you can just reach out to me. I can do that too. Do you get additional income deductions if you contribute to spouse? There's no such thing as a spousal FHSA. So with the first home savings account, it must come from a bank account of the individual. So if you have two spouses, spouse A is one that's outside the home earning all the money, spouse B is at home either taking care of the home or taking care of kids or just not working, that spouse who's at home has to open up their own checking account, and the money has to come for the FHSA from their own checking account. It can come from a joint account, but it cannot come from the spouse's account to the FHSA. Okay. And sorry, what is spousal? It's spousal RSPs are very common, and that's where one spouse who's earning more in the way of income contributes to the lower income earning spouse. The higher income earning spouse receives the deduction off their income, saving more tax because they're in a higher income tax bracket than the spouse where the money is now growing. Okay. Uh, any more? Okay, so HF has asked the following question. Uh, when I talk about independent pension plans for self-employed or clinic owners, do I have any recommendations on who to go with or where to look? Okay, so there's a difference between a formal individual pension plan, okay, referred to as an IPP, and an individual pension plan, in other words, a savings plan for your retirement. Okay. So what I was referring to is a savings plan, not a formal individual pension plan. When it comes to a formal individual pension plan, you need to work with someone who either has the expertise in dealing with an IPP or individual pension plan, or has access to people who have that requisite knowledge. Usually IPPs are done with large dollars, and they're done with institution investments such as insurance companies, and there's often an insurance component involved in there. I am not an IPP, individual pension plan expert. I do, for the few instances that I've run into situations where it's made sense, I do have the resources to refer you to someone, and that would be through myself to one of the insurance companies. That's how I would handle it. But Jeff, I know that's probably not exactly what you were hoping to hear. You wanted a definitive. My degree's in psychology, so I sit on the fence and I never commit to a definitive. Okay, sorry to anyone else who has a degree in psychology. All right, any other questions here? We should have some. Okay, hang on a second. Okay, so James, recognizing there are many ways to spend money other than towards investment retirement planning goals, but for the purpose of this question, assuming an individual is focused on retirement planning targets, do you have a rough and ready approach to present day valuation, the ability to participate in the defined benefit plan? This comes in particular context of comparing job offers, one with the DB plan and another offer without. If you can have access to a defined benefit plan and you're okay as an employee, I would go for the defined benefit plan, period. It takes a lot of the responsibility of saving out of the hands of the individual. Defined benefit pension plans are becoming a thing of the past. They're quite lucrative to the individual who's receiving. And if you move from an employer with a defined benefit plan, later on, you can either leave the pension plan where it is, or you can take it out, and it's called commuting, and receive a fairly large amount of money. Okay. And then James also says, okay, so if one employer has a defined benefit plan and the other doesn't, how much of a premium should the other employer be prepared to pay in order to equate to the defined benefit plan? I've never run those numbers, so I honestly don't know what that correct premium would be, but it would certainly be a definitive. I mean, because think about it. If you're, let's say you're earning $70,000, we'll keep with that, and you're going to work at a hospital that has access to Hoop versus a private clinic, uh, and that contribution, you're in essence creating a pool of money of about $750,000 come retirement. So take the time value of money to present day, what that 750,000 should be, and that's your premium. Would be the way that I would look at it, which would be a substantial thing for a smaller private clinic to provide you, or even a larger employer who doesn't have a defined benefit to provide you. Uh, can't help you any more on that. Ali, can an FHS be used for all closing costs or just down payment? There's no stipulation as to how an FHSA or a home buyer's plan from the RSP, how that money is to be used. It can be used in any part of the home purchase. The key is that there is a purchase of a home. You are going to complete a government document that says that you've bought a home. So if you use it on closing costs, great. If you, use it to furnish the home, great. If you use it as money that you're going to need for your down payment, great. All three are acceptable. HF, so the non-IPP planning simply involves using RSPs, other investment accounts to ensure. Yes, so HF has clarified what I was referring to with the individual pension plan is savings vehicles, be them RSPs, be them FHSAs, be them TFSAs, be them non-registered, be it investing in property, be it whatever the investment is that you're investing with the intent of using that investment for retirement. That's what I meant by an individual pension plan, informal versus an IPP, which is a formal pension plan, just titled as an individual pension plan. Okay. Other questions? Some are still percolating. Amy, have I hit all the questions? Was that it? Oh, I've got a new message. Okay. Okay, Ali's got, assuming that no home will be bought for at least 5 to 7 years, and if you have money in a TFSA and want to contribute to either the TFSA or the FHSA, but can do both, is it wise to pull money from the TFSA to put into the FHSA for tax sheltering or leave it in the TFSA? Great question. Very easy answer. You're going to get a deduction off your income by moving the money from the TFSA into the FHSA, and that contribution room, the money that you take out of the TFSA as of January 1 of the next year is added back in. So I would take, if I had a TFSA and I had more than $8,000 in there, I would immediately take 8,000 and put it into an FHSA, because you're going to get the deduction of 8,000 off your income. The next year, you're going to get your 8,000 contribution room back, and there's no tax. So you get tax deduction up front, no tax on the way out to buy a house. So as far as I'm concerned, if you don't own a home and you one day will want a home, then the FHSA probably makes the most sense, as long as you have an emergency fund or money somewhere else in the event that you need that money, some money out. Because if you take the 8,000, let's say that's all you had in the TFSA, and you move it over and you put it into your FHSA, and 3 weeks later you need $3,000, you're not getting it out of the FHSA without having a whole pile of problems. Okay. So if you're concerned that you might run into a large cost and you don't have an emergency fund elsewhere, then you may want to leave some of the money sitting in your TFSA and transfer some of it over to the FHSA. Or if you're regularly contributing to the TFSA, stop those regular contributions, leave the TFSA as your emergency fund, and start depositing to the FHSA. Does that help?
Yes, thank you, Brian.
Okay, good question. All right. Still got a full group. I still see all kinds of people here. So all I can say, and I think I've said this before, if you think your question is stupid, the only way it will be is if you don't ask it. And I assure you, if you think you have a stupid question, there's at least 5 other people on this who have the same question. Okay. So, all right. So Amy's just telling you about next week with the insurance. Okay. Okay, so Allie, here's another one for you. In a 29% marginal tax bracket, 50 to 100K, where most physios start off, will you get a better deduction by doing 8K per year or 16 in 1 year? Uh, that's a great question. One that I haven't had asked, so I haven't run the numbers. Uh, it, just let me think for a second. When the marginal tax rate is the tax rate applicable to the very last dollar that you earn. So if you put 8,000 in, you're reducing the top 8,000. If you put 16 in, you're reducing the top 16. If you do 8,000 1 year, let's say 70 down to 62, you're going to save on that 8,000 at that tax bracket. If you went from 70 down to 54, you're only going to save the at the marginal rate for that second 8,000. I don't think it really makes a heck of a lot of difference. I think it probably would be, if I ran the numbers, I'd probably say put the 8,000 in each year because the money is growing tax free from minute one. Uh, and you're going to save yourself probably a proportionate amount of tax over those 2 years, but I haven't run the numbers on that, so I don't know. That's 2 times tonight that I've not known something. It's a good seminar. I love this. I love getting stumped. Okay. Any other questions? Allie, you got more?
Possibility they're brewing.
Okay. I thought I saw smoke. Okay. I actually have a comment. So for those who are on this, who are incorporated, one of the things that you have to be careful about is, yes, you can save and keep the money inside the corporation. Depending on how you're saving that money depends on whether it's tax efficient to be done in the corporation or it's better to pay yourself a salary and do it in an RSP. That's something that you need to discuss with a financial planner and your accountant. And an accountant is generally not a financial planner. You need someone who looks at things beyond just the tax component, the overall picture, not just, forgive me if anyone is married to or has a parent who's an accountant. Accountants are bean counters. You need someone who looks at more than just the beans that you have on the table. Okay. Okay, here's another question that I often get. How much should I be saving every year? That's a great question. I'm thankful that someone asked that. So let me answer that question for you. What you have is the following. There is no right or wrong amount to be saving on an ongoing basis. The bottom line is the more that you can save, the better that it will be for your future. And you have to determine how much you're willing to, in essence, forego today to have down the road, presuming that you have a finite amount of income. If you are spending, if you earn 70,000, you pay 12,000 in tax, and you have 58,000 remaining, and you're spending 50,000 and on day-to-day expenses and stuff, leaving $8,000. The question is, how much of that 8,000 should you invest? But you maybe want to go travel to the next Olympics. Well, okay, so figure out what that is, work it into your spending plan. If you go back to the cash flow area when I talked about spending plan, determine how much of that 8,000 should be invested and how much should be invested for that penultimate trip. Or maybe better yet, figure out when you want to go on that penultimate trip, figure out how much per month to today. So if you want to go on that penultimate trip in 36 months, then you need to say, okay, if the trip's going to cost me 7,200, I can put $200 a month away now, and in 36 months I'll have that money. Then you take the 8,000 that you haven't spent, and that you can invest, or vice versa. So again, there's no definitive rule. What I can tell you is my experience is if you're living within your means now, as I've said before on these webinars, I can teach if you're spending more than what you're bringing in, that's being financially stupid. I can teach you to be intelligent. But if you're spending well below your means, you're never going to go out and buy a new car. You're already financially intelligent. I can't teach you to be financially stupid. If you're financially intelligent now, you will always be financially intelligent. And I'd be very surprised if you weren't able to fund your retirement effectively and live comfortably. The biggest question for you will be what will your expenses look like come retirement and how much money is needed to generate that income requirement. And then everything over and above that will be a luxury. If you're not intelligent presently, then either reach out to myself or reach out to a financial advisor. Now, a financial advisor doesn't just do investments. They really do look at all five of those areas. If you have someone who says they're a financial advisor and all they're looking at is your investments, that's an investment person, likely an investment salesperson. If all they look at is your insurance, and not everything else, then that's an insurance salesperson. You want someone who does everything. I think we've had a couple of questions come in. Difference between a corporation and professional corporation. Okay, so the question is there a difference between tax implications on what's called a general services corporation versus a professional services corporation? There is absolutely no tax difference between the two of them, presuming that everything else is held constant. So, Derek, whether you're a professional services corporation or you're part owner or an owner of a general services corporation, tax implications are going to be the same thing. Okay. Amy, did I miss anything? I don't think so. No. Okay, good. All right. Anyone else have questions? Derek anymore? HF anymore?
I'm gonna go ahead and stop recording, Brian, but we can give people a
Okay.
few more minutes if more questions come up, okay?
Sounds like a plan. Oh, one more message. Rushy, is there any difference in capital gain on general corp versus professional corp? No, no difference on capital gain. Capital gain in a corporation, now you're going to pay 2/3. 2/3 of it is going to be included in the tax of the corporation for that year.